All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Believe in Bills pre-draft. Adam Beane, WGRZ TV and Sports Talk Live Buffalo, and as always, Sal Mayorana from the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle on the Bills beat. Joe DeLeone is our guest today. Among many other things, he is the NFL draft and college football analyst for A to Z Sports, and just the type of guy we need to talk to now with the draft set for next week. Joe, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, more than excited to help figure out what the Bills should be doing in the 2025 draft. There's plenty of opportunities for them to find some key starters for this next season.
Which
All right,
they
so
need.
let's jump. Let's just jump right into it since time is short. We all have things to do today. Look, Joe, there's a very obvious need: defensive tackle and cornerback. I think the Bills cannot afford to get cute here in the first round. If you had to make a pick for the Bills, which one of those positions do you think would serve them best at number 30?
I think that the easiest approach for this is that they're afforded the ability to take any of many defensive tackle names that are on the board because there's just so many great options. There's a chance that they could miss out on some of the premier names at cornerback. Guy like Maxwell Harrison from Kentucky, who's a great player, could be off the board by then. Will Johnson will probably be gone and already selected the Michigan corner. But if they're sitting there still at pick 30, the defensive tackles that they could end up selecting include Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, who's a big body, mauling presence, a guy who can take on double teams, command the attention of an offensive line, and free up Ed Oliver as well as the rest of that entire defensive unit. The other directions that they could potentially turn in, I really like Derek Harmon from Oregon, who could maybe slide a little bit because other positions are prioritized. He's a tall, long guy that can play different roles in different schemes, in different fronts, because he has that size and length to be used in multiple ways. And I'll throw out one more who I think is a quiet riser throughout this process, who had an awesome Senior Bowl performance, had some pretty good testing, is Darius Alexander of Toledo. Tall guy that's got some really long arms, who is a very dominant pass rusher. It reminds me a lot of Chris Jones, and I'm sure that the Bills, having to go to war with the Chiefs as much as they do, would love to have their own version of Chris Jones.
Yeah,
that's the one guy you didn't mention was Kenneth Grant. A lot of people have Kenneth Grant mocked to the Bills. Do you see him going? Is he, a no doubt about it, going to be gone by 30, or do you see him no longer being worth the 30th pick?
I'm in the camp that I think that he's going to be off the board. I think that he is one of a couple of defensive tackles that is just so rare to come by. And it's the fact that he's 330 pounds and he can move the way that he does. I think he reminds me a ton of Dexter Lawrence, and the way that Dexter Lawrence has not only been a really just overwhelming nose tackle for the Giants, but he's developed into a sack-producing defensive tackle because he's got the burst to create space for himself. He's got the hands to clear centers and guards. I think that Grant's going to be gone. And I think that just generally the NFL loves these massive dudes that can move really well. Jordan Davis a few years ago with the Eagles is a really good example of that. I think that there's a good shot that he won't be there for the Bills.
Well, you look at what the Philadelphia Eagles showed in their Super Bowl victory over the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're the prototype, right? They are the model for how NFL defensive fronts at the moment need to be constructed. You could even go back to the Giants' victories over the Patriots in the Super Bowls or whatever, and the ability to get pressure with four. And the Bills have built a very nimble defensive front, but it does lack that size. Sal and I have been using the term that girth that the Eagles have and that served them so well in winning the Super Bowl and defeating Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs this year. But you could argue, as important a position and need as that is, philosophically and otherwise, for the Bills, cornerback, really, I mean, they don't have a starter at this point opposite Christian Benford, who's they just locked up to an extension. Phenomenal overachieving type player, former 6th round pick. Brandon Beane has been known to wheel and deal. He's armed with 10 picks. He's at 30 in the first round, couple of second rounders, doesn't have anything in the third round right now, which we expect will probably change as the draft goes on. But I guess my question to you would be, would you anticipate him making a move up? I don't know how far he'd be willing to go and how expensive that would be, but to address the cornerback position, I mean, any of your scenarios, do you see Buffalo doing that because it is such an important area? And if so, what player might they be targeting?
Yeah, I think that for one specific player that something like this could absolutely happen, and that's Will Johnson, the Michigan corner. He is so instinctual. He is a guy who I think is going to go on to immediately become an all-pro in his first 3 years. He is a Pat Surtain type of a corner that is so fluid and is able to win in man coverage situations, but is able to almost predict what quarterbacks are going to do and what direction they're going to turn before they even throw it. A lot of his best plays happen because he breaks on a ball before it's even out of a quarterback's hand. I think that if there is, which has been speculated recently, that Will Johnson could slide into the teens to the late teens if the Miami Dolphins or the Cincinnati Bengals, two teams that need corner help, end up maybe passing on him. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills don't consider, you know what, this might be expensive, but let's move up and let's actually get an impactful starter like Will Johnson. We are getting a huge discount on the fact that he is available where he is, and they wouldn't have to move up where he should be drafted, which is somewhere closer to pick 10. But I think Will Johnson would absolutely be that player if they decided to be aggressive and to go after someone.
Now, if they end up sticking at 30, I believe Johnson will be gone, and I'm not sure Beane's going to have the appetite to do what it's going to take to go up and get him in those positions. So if they end up staying at 30, there's a couple guys that I think will be available. One of them I want you to talk about is Maxwell Hairston, who ran the fastest 40 time at the Combine. I know he had the injury at the end of the year, but he seems like a guy who would be really interesting for the Bills. And then another guy is Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, also a guy that seems like he would fit the Bills scheme. What do you think about those guys at number 30? Is the value right? And tell us a little bit about those two players.
I think the value for Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky is absolutely there. I think that would be a great pick. I kind of wonder if a team like the Vikings, for example, who need corner help as well, don't already pick him. But the speed is on film. He was inconsistently healthy this past year, so his film didn't really paint the full picture of what he could be in the NFL. But he flies downfield in a hurry. He picks up speed so quickly. He is able to shut down gaps faster than anybody in this class because of that burst that he plays with. I think that Hairston would be the smarter pick. I know that a number of other media members really like Trey Amos. If there's one guy I don't really get the buzz for, it is Trey Amos. Now, I understand what you're talking about here with the Bills scheme, that he would be a strong fit. I agree with that. He is more of a zone-based corner, and the reason for that is his hips just aren't as good. He does not have the fluid hips to play in man coverage in a scheme that relies heavily on man coverage. So I have a little bit of a pause on Trey Amos. He's the only guy of these corners that keeps getting projected to go in the first round that I don't really like that. And I don't really feel that is a pick that would be worth making, but it's certainly something that could come to fruition because he's got the size and he has the athleticism.
And I want to ask you too, since we're on cornerbacks before we switch over, if they end up going into the second round, what about the kid, Azare Thomas from Florida State? It seems like if they wanted him, they would probably have to move up a little bit from 52 or from 56 in the second round. Where do you think he fits in the draft? And is he a possibility that the Bills should consider?
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment that you just brought up there with Azariah Thomas, that he's probably going to be somebody that goes at the very beginning of the second round with not a lot of good corner options that start to dwindle after we get past that point. I have a higher grade on Thomas than I do on Amos, and it's because Thomas is so awesome in man coverage. He is so easy moving. He opens up so well, and he's got really good upper body strength and length that allows him to redirect receivers and completely manhandle them cleanly without getting drawn for any penalties. He is able to just use his physical tools to keep such sticky coverage with anybody that he's covering. So I think that is another name for any of these teams that need corners, that they need to be not in a panicked mode, but need to be thinking, man, if we're a little too patient here, we're going to miss out on him.
All right, so we've addressed what we think are the primary areas. of need. And that's always a relative term when it comes to Brandon Beane and the Bills and the way they make their selections. It wouldn't shock Sal or I or many others if they addressed the safety position. The Starks kid from Georgia, that would be a player I think that they might covet. But in the time we have left here, the other one that gets a lot of buzz among the fan base, as productive as the Bills offense was last year, there seemed to lack that explosive downfield speed element in the receiving core. Now, you'll have some people like Steve Tasker, one of the great special teams players of all time, was on the show with us last week, and he thinks the receiver room is pretty much set the way it is right now, that to make the argument that I'm bringing up, that you're, quote, splitting hairs. And there's plenty of people that feel that way. And look at the points the Bills scored last year. I mean, the production spoke for itself. But the flip side is, and I do think they'd like to add that element. I don't think it's particularly high, but maybe second round, that sort of a thing. Who are the players who you, in that range in terms of the value, who you think might, Buffalo might be interested in for those reasons?
Yeah, and to kind of build off of that, I would argue that for as good as their offense was, imagine if you armed Josh Allen with even better weapons. I think you've got a good receiver room, and there's an ability to have some more explosiveness. And some of the second round options that have caught my eye that could be fits for this team, there's great speed with a guy like Jalen Knoll, who tested really well at the NFL Combine. He reminds me a lot of Steve Smith, the former Panthers and Ravens receiver who plays really well through contact, would be a really reliable option over the middle, and also has, again, that deep speed to attack up the seam and be a targeted guy for Josh Allen if they did want to attack over the top. And then I would also add in there his teammate Jaden Higgins, who tested really, really well, who had a 4.4 40 time. His deep speed is a little bit different, where you'd be targeting him along the sideline on deep route concepts. It's 6'4", really nice route runner, great release, creates space for himself with his footwork and his shiftiness for a player of his size. I think both of those guys would absolutely be worthy of consideration. And I'll throw out one more. I know we're talking second round, but if they wanted to address receiver a little bit later on day 3, a guy that I think deserves more recognition is Caden Prather from Maryland. His hands are inconsistent, but a 6'3" guy who's 200 pounds, ran in the low 4.4s, can take the top off of a defense, and is super flexible as a route runner, which is really hard to come by.
One of the guys that they had for a top 30 visit was Jalen Royals. It feels like second round might be too early for him. They don't have a third round pick, so there's no way he's going to get past the third round, I don't think, but maybe. What do you I mean, if that's a player that you think fits the Bills, where do you think the range is where they'd have to be to pick him if he's worth it?
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of Jalen Royals. Right now, he's my 8th rated receiver, and I think that because he's coming out of Utah State, that's kind of just dragged him for some reason. He was an early darling for some people, and then all these other guys have propped up ahead of him. I think that he is also another guy, like looking and needing a more compact route runner that is just super efficient and detailed in how they use their feet to create separation. That is one of those missing pieces to this receiver room, and that Jalen Royals is exactly that. Before he suffered the injury that he did at Utah State, he was a bucket every single time that they targeted him. He was the only guy that they could turn to whenever they needed a big play, and he was juking out everybody that was in close distance that he was going to turn into a victim of taking their ankles. So I think that Jalen Royals is worthy of consideration. He going in the second round, I don't think it's too early. And I think the biggest reason why is that this receiver class, like a couple of other offensive positions, it falls off of a cliff once we get to round 4. So taking advantage of grabbing a receiver that you like, there really is no round that's too early.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on, while we're here, Luther Burden? Because there seems to be a little bit of, not sure about his attitude, his workout, but I mean, where do you see him ending up? What position in the round?
Yeah, I think that he's probably going to go at the beginning of the second round, and maybe the Bills move up to go and grab him. I think that he's going to be a steal. I think the lack of production just came from Missouri's offense just completely falling apart this year. I don't think it had anything to do with him. I think that they struggled to scheme him the football. He is somebody who would work with the Bills because he doesn't need to be their primary target. They've got so many other guys that they can turn to, and he can just go and be a technician in the slot. Very similar to Deebo Samuel or Golden Tate, where creates after the catch, almost a running back with the ball in his hands. I think that he's probably going to go at the beginning of the second round, or if he went in the back end of the first, I wouldn't be shocked as well.
All right. Interesting stuff. And one thing as we wrap it up here, I think we'd probably all agree, and Brandon Beane has even alluded to this in a recent media appearance. They're not in the third round right now, but I would fully expect them. I don't think he's making 10 picks, which is what they have. I think he would greatly value, for some of the reasons we've discussed, making a move to get into the third round before all is said and done. And if it is receiver, that's something, a place I think they might address that position as well. So, Joe, thanks very much. We know you're up against it. You got hop on another show in a couple of minutes here. So we appreciate Joe DeLeone, again, NFL draft college football analyst. Catch his work at A to Z Sports. Sal Majorana, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. If you read Sal's recent articles, a lot of specific rundowns on a lot of the players we have addressed. I am Adam Beane, WGRZ TV. Full draft preview coming up Monday night, 7 o'clock on Sports Talk Live. All right, Joe, thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it.
Of course, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thanks for being with us here on Believe in Bills.